The Grand Meridian Hotel ballroom sparkled with crystal chandeliers and the gentle murmur of corporate small talk. I adjusted my tie, scanning the crowd for my wife, Sarah. She'd been working at Pinnacle Financial for 3 years now, and tonight was their annual gala, the kind of event where partnerships were forged and careers were made or broken. I spotted her near the bar, radiant in her navy dress, laughing with colleagues. My chest swelled with pride. Sarah had worked incredibly hard to become one of the youngest senior analysts at the firm. This event mattered to her, and I was determined to be the supportive husband she deserved. "There you are," Sarah said, her eyes lighting up as I approached. "I want you to meet some people from my department." She introduced me to faces I'd heard about but never met: Jennifer from compliance, Marcus from risk assessment, and then him. Derek Hoffman, Regional Vice President. Mid-40s, expensive suit, the kind of smile that never quite reached his eyes. "So you're the lucky man who snagged our Sarah," Derek said, his handshake lingering a fraction too long. Something in his tone made my jaw tighten, but I smiled politely. "I'm the lucky one," I replied evenly. The evening progressed pleasantly enough. Dinner was served, overpriced chicken that tasted like cardboard, but the wine was excellent. Sarah gave me subtle updates between courses, pointing out the office politics playing out in real time. The CEO was 3 tables over. The board members clustered like a murder of crows in their corner. Derek Hoffman held court at the center table, loud and commanding attention. "He thinks he's getting the CFO position," Sarah whispered. "The announcement is supposed to come next week." After dinner, people scattered, some to the smoking terrace, others to the bar, many to network with surgical precision. Sarah excused herself to the restroom, and I stepped outside for some air, pulling out my phone to check messages from my own work. I ran a cybersecurity consulting firm, and one of my clients was having server issues. I was typing a response when I heard it. Sarah's voice, strained and uncomfortable. "Derek, please, I really need to get back." I moved without thinking, rounding the corner where a secluded hallway led to the restrooms. What I saw made my blood turn to ice. Derek had Sarah backed against the wall, one hand planted beside her head, the other resting far too familiarly on her waist. His face was inches from hers, and even from 20 feet away, I could see the fear in her eyes masked by professional politeness. "Come on, Sarah," he was saying, words slightly slurred. "Everyone knows you're the reason I pushed for that promotion on your team. Don't you think that deserves a little gratitude?" His hand slid lower, and Sarah's face went pale. "Get your hands off my wife." My voice came out deadly calm, the kind of calm that comes before a storm. Derek turned, his expression morphing from surprise to irritation to calculation in rapid succession. "Hey, buddy, we were just talking. I saw exactly what you were doing." I crossed the distance between us in 3 strides. Derek's hand dropped from Sarah's waist, but the smug expression never left his face. "Look, you're clearly misreading the situation." "Am I?" I positioned myself between him and Sarah, close enough to smell the whiskey on his breath. "Because what I saw was you putting your hands on someone who clearly didn't want them there. At your company event, where you're a senior executive." Something flickered in Derek's eyes, a flash of concern, but it was quickly replaced by arrogance. "Listen, I don't know what your wife told you, but nothing happened. And honestly, making a scene here would only hurt her career. Mine is bulletproof." He actually smirked when he said it. That's when I made my decision. In that moment, staring at this predator who thought his position made him untouchable, I decided Derek Hoffman's career wouldn't last the night. "You're right," I said quietly. "Making a scene would be unprofessional." Derek's smirk widened. "Smart man. Now if you'll excuse me. I have a better idea. Why don't we all head back to the party? Enjoy the rest of the evening." Derek looked confused but relieved. He had no idea what was coming. As he walked away, shoulders already relaxed with the confidence of someone who'd gotten away with something, Sarah grabbed my arm. "Michael, what are you going to do?" I looked at my wife, strong, brilliant, and shaken by what had just happened, and felt something cold and calculating settle into place. I'm going to make sure he never does this to anyone again. Sarah and I returned to the ballroom separately from Derek. She was still trembling slightly, trying to compose herself, and I guided her to a quiet corner table. "Are you okay?" I asked, keeping my voice gentle but my eyes scanning the room. "I'm fine. She paused, taking a shaky breath. That wasn't the first time, Michael. He's made comments before, found excuses to touch my shoulder, stand too close. But tonight." Her voice trailed off. Rage burned white-hot in my chest, but I kept my expression neutral. "Has he done this to others?" Sarah nodded slowly. "There are rumors. A junior analyst named Rebecca left suddenly last year, and I've heard whispers about an intern before my time. But Derek's untouchable, he brings in the biggest clients, and the board loves him." "Not after tonight," I said quietly. I pulled out my phone and opened a specialized app, one of the tools my cybersecurity firm had developed for corporate investigations. "I need you to trust me. Can you give me names? Anyone who might have experienced something similar with Derek." Sarah hesitated for only a moment before nodding. She rattled off 4 names, including Rebecca's, and I noted them all. Then I stood. "Where are you going?" Sarah asked. "To work. Stay here, mingle if you can. Act normal. I'll be back." I moved through the crowd with purpose, my mind already cataloging everything I knew about Pinnacle Financial's infrastructure. Sarah had mentioned their systems during casual dinner conversations. Nothing confidential, just the usual complaints about slow servers and annoying security protocols. But I'd listened, and I'd remembered. First stop, the smoking terrace. I found Marcus from Risk Assessment holding court with a group of younger employees, cigarette in hand. "Marcus, right?" I approached with an easy smile. "Sarah's husband. Mind if I pick your brain about something?" Corporate people love to talk shop, especially after a few drinks. Within 10 minutes, I'd confirmed that Pinnacle used a relatively standard corporate network with a cloud-based HR system. Marcus even complained about how the VPN constantly logged people out, requiring them to re-authenticate through their phones. Perfect. Next, I circulated, engaging in seemingly innocuous conversations. I learned that Derek was indeed the frontrunner for CFO. I learned that he'd been with the company for 12 years. I learned that the CEO, Richard Castellano, was a stickler for corporate ethics after a scandal at his previous company had nearly destroyed his reputation. Every piece of information was a weapon, and I was building an arsenal. At 9:30, I excused myself to the lobby, claiming a work emergency. The hotel had a business center, a small room with 3 computers and a printer. It was empty. I sat down, cracked my knuckles, and went to work. Years of cybersecurity consulting had taught me something important. The weakest link in any security system isn't technology, it's people. And at corporate events, people got comfortable. They checked emails on unsecured hotel Wi-Fi. They bragged about their access levels. They left their phones unattended. I opened my laptop and activated a network scanner. The hotel's Wi-Fi was, as expected, poorly secured. Within minutes, I'd identified every device connected to the network. I filtered for Pinnacle Financial employee emails. There were 37 active connections. Derek's phone was among them, and the fool was checking his work email on an unsecured network. I deployed a man-in-the-middle attack, positioning myself between Derek's device and the email server. It took exactly 4 minutes to capture his authentication token. Another 2 minutes to access his email account through a spoofed session. What I found was damning. Hundreds of emails. Inappropriate comments to female employees. Messages that started professional and slowly turned predatory. And then, jackpot, an entire folder labeled HR confidential that Derek had no business accessing. Inside were complaints. 3 formal complaints from female employees over the past 5 years. One from Rebecca, the junior analyst Sarah mentioned. Another from an intern named Melissa Chen. A third from a woman named Patricia Gomez who'd been a senior manager. Each complaint had been detailed, credible, and specific. And each had been mysteriously resolved, with the complainant either leaving the company or accepting generous transfers to different departments, in different states. Derek had access to these files because of his position on a special advisory board. He'd known about every complaint against him and had clearly used his influence to bury them. I downloaded everything. Emails, complaints, calendar invites showing private meetings with young female employees, expense reports showing lavish dinners with subordinates. Even a series of text messages he'd synced to his email, including some from tonight, boasting to a friend about breaking in the new senior analyst, my wife. My hands shook with rage, but I forced myself to stay focused. Evidence was only useful if presented correctly. I created a new email address using a secure, anonymous service. Then I compiled a comprehensive document, a timeline of Derek's behavior, supported by his own emails and the buried complaints. I included screenshots, metadata, everything needed to verify authenticity. But I wasn't sending it yet. Derek had said his career was bulletproof. I was going to prove him spectacularly wrong, but I needed the moment to be perfect, public, undeniable, and devastating. I returned to the ballroom 50 minutes after I'd left. Sarah caught my eye from across the room, concern written across her face. I gave her a small nod. Derek was at the bar, laughing loudly, one hand on the shoulder of a young woman I didn't recognize. She looked uncomfortable. I checked my watch. 10:15. The CEO was scheduled to give closing remarks at 11, followed by the traditional toast. That's when important announcements were made. That's when I would detonate Derek Hoffman's career. The ballroom buzzed with the particular energy of an event winding down, ties loosened, laughter louder, inhibitions lowered by top-shelf liquor. I watched Derek hold court near the bar, his voice carrying across the room as he told some story that had his circle of admirers chuckling obediently. The young woman he'd been touching had managed to extract herself, and I saw relief flash across her face as she escaped toward a group of older colleagues. I found Sarah near the dessert table, nervously shredding a napkin. "It's going to be okay," I whispered, touching her elbow gently. "Trust me." "What did you do?" she asked, her voice barely audible over the music. Something that should have been done years ago. Before she could respond, the lights dimmed slightly, and a voice came over the sound system. "Ladies and gentlemen, please find your seats. Our CEO, Richard Castellano, will be giving his closing remarks in 5 minutes." The crowd began migrating toward tables. I guided Sarah to a seat with a clear view of the stage, then positioned myself strategically, close enough to act, far enough to observe. Derek, predictably, sat at his center table, surrounded by his team, looking every bit the king of his domain. Richard Castellano took the stage, silver-haired, distinguished, wearing the kind of confidence that came from decades in corporate leadership. He began with the usual pleasantries, thanking everyone for attending, acknowledging the company's successful year, praising the hard-working employees who made it all possible. I pulled out my phone and opened the document I'd prepared. My thumb hovered over the send button. But I wasn't sending it to HR or the board, not yet. I had something more immediate in mind. The hotel had provided screens throughout the ballroom, displaying the company logo and event hashtag. They were connected to a central system controlled from the AV booth, where a young technician was managing the presentation slides for Castellano's speech. I'd noticed him earlier, taking smoke breaks, his laptop bag carelessly left near the booth entrance. While everyone had been focused on dinner, I'd taken 60 seconds to plug a small device into the network port behind one of those screens. It was currently sitting dormant, waiting for my command. Castellano continued his speech. "As we look toward the future, I'm reminded that our greatest asset isn't our portfolio or our market position, it's our people. It's the culture we've built together, founded on respect, integrity, and excellence." The irony was almost painful. I glanced at Derek, who was nodding along, the picture of a respected executive. My jaw clenched. "And speaking of our people," Castellano continued, "I'm pleased to announce several promotions that will take effect next quarter." The room fell silent with anticipation. This was the moment careers were made. First, I'd like to recognize Derek Hoffman, whose leadership in the Western region has been exceptional. My heart rate spiked. This was it. My window was closing. As Castellano continued praising Derek, I activated the device. It took 3 seconds to establish connection with the AV system. Another 5 seconds to override the display controls. And so it gives me great pleasure to announce. The screens changed. Castellano paused mid-sentence, confused. The company logo disappeared, replaced by a document header, pattern of sexual harassment, Derek Hoffman, confidential investigation report. The room fell deathly silent. Every eye turned to the multiple screens now displaying the first page of my compiled evidence. A timeline of complaints, starting 5 years ago, each entry showing dates, names redacted to protect the victims, and brief descriptions of Derek's behavior. "What the hell?" someone muttered. Castellano looked backstage frantically. "Can we get control of the—" The document advanced to the next page. Email screenshots appeared, sent from Derek's own account. Comments about female employees' appearances. Messages discussing which interns were fresh meat. A particularly vile text exchange about rating the women in his department. I watched Derek's face drain of color. He stood abruptly, knocking over his wine glass. "This is fake. Someone hacked." The next slide showed the buried HR complaints, complete with case numbers and resolution notes. Then came Derek's own calendar appointments. Private meeting, Rebecca Chen. Dinner, discuss career opportunities, Melissa Chen. Review performance, Jennifer Marks. All scheduled outside business hours. All with young female employees. "Turn it off," Derek shouted. He was moving toward the AV booth now, but hotel security had appeared, equally confused about what was happening. The final slide was the most damning. A screenshot of Derek's email from earlier today, the one to his friend, got the sexy new senior analyst backed into a corner tonight. "She'll come around. They always do when their career's on the line." Sarah gasped beside me. Other people were pulling out their phones, taking pictures of the screens before they could be shut down. The damage was done, digital evidence, witnessed by hundreds of people, including board members and the CEO. Castellano's face had gone from confused to horrified to furiously angry. "Derek, my office. Now. Security, escort Mr. Hoffman out of this event." "Richard, I can explain. This is a setup. Someone is trying to sabotage." "The metadata on those emails shows they came from your account," I called out, standing. All eyes turned to me. "I'm a cybersecurity consultant. I can verify the authenticity of every document shown. The timestamps, the server logs, everything." "Who the hell are you?" Derek snarled. "I'm the husband of the woman you assaulted tonight. The woman in that email you sent. The one you said would come around." The room erupted. Gasps, angry muttering, people standing to get a better look. Sarah stood beside me, her hand finding mine, squeezing tight. Derek's face contorted with rage and panic. "You can't prove anything. This is entrapment." Actually, a voice cut through the chaos. A woman stood, mid-40s, professional, her face set with determination. "I can corroborate it. Derek Hoffman sexually harassed me 3 years ago. I filed a complaint that was mysteriously buried. My name is Patricia Gomez." Another woman stood. "Rebecca Chen. He did the same to me. I left the company because I couldn't get anyone to listen." Then another. And another. 4 women in total, each sharing their name, each confirming their experience with Derek Hoffman. The evidence on the screens, combined with live testimony, was irrefutable. Security reached Derek, taking his arms. He struggled briefly, then seemed to deflate, the reality of his situation crashing down. As they led him toward the exit, he locked eyes with me. The arrogance was gone, replaced by pure hatred. "You're dead," he mouthed. I smiled coldly. "No. Your career is." The Grand Meridian Ballroom had transformed from a celebration into a crime scene, not literally, but the atmosphere was identical. Clusters of employees huddled together, voices hushed and urgent. Board members had disappeared into a side conference room with Richard Castellano. Hotel staff stood frozen, uncertain whether to clean up or preserve evidence. And at the center of it all sat Sarah and me, an island of calm in a sea of chaos. My phone buzzed incessantly. The anonymous email I'd prepared had been automatically sent the moment the AV system was hacked, timed perfectly. It went to the board of directors, the HR department, Pinnacle Financial's legal team, and, just for good measure, the employment law division of 3 major law firms known for representing corporate harassment victims. Mr. Whitmore. A woman in her 60s approached our table, her expression grave but respectful. The nameplate at her seat had read Margaret Fisk, board chair. I'm going to need to speak with both of you. Privately. We followed her to a smaller conference room where Castellano and 2 other board members waited. The CEO looked like he'd aged 10 years in 20 minutes. Let me be very clear, Margaret began, settling into a chair with the authority of someone who'd commanded boardrooms for decades. What happened tonight is unconscionable. The harassment itself, the buried complaints, the abuse of access to confidential HR files, all of it. She fixed me with a sharp look. However, Mr. Whitmore, the method you used to expose this information was also highly irregular. Hacking into company systems, intercepting private communications. All of Derek's communications were accessed through his own compromised device on an unsecured network, I interrupted calmly. He was checking company email on public Wi-Fi without VPN protection. I didn't hack your systems, I documented what he was carelessly broadcasting. Any competent cybersecurity audit would have flagged his behavior as a massive security risk. Castellano leaned forward. You're saying our VP of operations was compromising corporate security. I'm saying Derek Hoffman had the security awareness of a teenager. His password was Pinnacle 2023. I didn't even need to crack it. It was visible in cached autofill data. He had confidential HR files stored in his personal email. He discussed proprietary client information in text messages. If I were conducting a professional audit, his access would have been terminated immediately. Margaret exchanged glances with the other board members. This is a disaster. The disaster was letting Derek operate unchecked for 5 years, I said quietly. This is the correction. Sarah finally spoke, her voice steady despite the tremor I could feel in her hand. I want to be clear about something. Michael didn't do this for revenge. He did it because your company failed to protect your employees. 3 women filed formal complaints. They had evidence. They went through proper channels. And they were silenced. We never saw those complaints, Castellano said, but his voice lacked conviction. Because Derek was on the advisory board that reviewed them, I pulled out my phone and displayed the email logs I'd saved. He had access to every complaint filed against senior leadership. He knew exactly what each woman said, and he used his influence to bury them. One was paid off with a promotion to your Denver office, 2,000 miles away. Another was given a glowing recommendation letter and encouraged to pursue opportunities elsewhere. The third was quietly terminated during a restructuring that coincidentally only affected her position. The room fell silent. Finally, Margaret spoke. What do you want? I want you to do what should have been done years ago, Sarah said. Fire Derek. Publicly acknowledge the failure of your HR processes. Reach out to every woman he targeted and offer to make it right, not just with money, but with transparency. And I want protection for anyone who comes forward now. Derek's employment will be terminated effective immediately, Margaret confirmed. We'll be launching a full investigation, and Mr. Whitmore, I'd like to hire your firm to conduct a complete security audit of our systems and HR processes. I nodded. On one condition. My wife is off limits for any retaliation. Her career continues undisturbed, and you make it crystal clear company-wide that she's protected. Agreed, Castellano said immediately. Ms. Whitmore, I'm deeply sorry for what you experienced. What you've experienced working here. He looked genuinely pained. This company failed you. We spent another hour documenting everything, formal statements, copies of evidence, contact information for the women who'd come forward. By the time we emerged from the conference room, the ballroom was nearly empty. A few stragglers remained, and I noticed Patricia Gomez among them, talking quietly with the other women who'd stood up. She saw us and walked over. Thank you, she said simply. I've spent 3 years thinking I was the problem, that I'd somehow encouraged him, or wasn't strong enough to fight back harder. You were strong enough to file a complaint, Sarah replied. The system failed you, not the other way around. Rebecca Chen joined us, younger, probably late 20s. What happens now? I mean, legally. Pinnacle's legal team will be reaching out, I explained. But you might want your own representation. Derek used his access to confidential information to retaliate against complaints. That's not just harassment, it's conspiracy, abuse of power, potentially criminal witness tampering. The employment lawyers I copied on the evidence dump will probably contact you. They work on contingency for cases like this. So he's really done? Rebecca asked, disbelief in her voice. His career is over, I confirmed. But more than that, there's now a documented pattern. If he tries to work in finance again, any competent background check will flag this. He'll be toxic to every major firm. My phone buzzed. A news alert. My heart sank as I read the headline, Pinnacle Financial VP exposed in harassment scandal at company gala. Someone had leaked it to the press. Probably one of the hundreds of people who'd photographed the screens before they were shut down. The story was already trending on financial news sites. Sarah read over my shoulder and let out a long breath. It's really over, isn't it? For Derek? Yes. His reputation is destroyed, professionally and personally. We left the hotel near midnight. The valet brought our car around, and as I held the door for Sarah, I saw a figure slumped against the building across the street. Derek. He was alone, jacket disheveled, face buried in his hands. For a moment, I almost felt sorry for him. Then I remembered his hand on Sarah's waist. His smug smile when he'd said his career was bulletproof. The email bragging about targeting my wife. The 3 other women whose careers had been derailed. The countless others who'd stayed silent. Do you think we did the right thing? Sarah asked as I pulled into traffic. I think we did the only thing that would actually work, I replied. People like Derek don't respond to quiet complaints or proper channels. They respond to consequences. Public, unavoidable consequences. He's going to sue. You know that, right? Let him try. Everything I accessed was through his own negligence on a public network. I didn't hack Pinnacle's systems. I documented his security failures. And the evidence speaks for itself. We drove in silence for a while. Finally, Sarah spoke again. Thank you. For believing me. For doing something when the system wouldn't. I reached over and took her hand. Always. 3 weeks later, I sat in my home office reviewing contracts when Sarah appeared in the doorway, tablet in hand, an unreadable expression on her face. You need to see this, she said. The article on her screen was from a major financial news outlet. Pinnacle Financial settles class action lawsuit. 7 additional women come forward against former VP Derek Hoffman. I scanned the article quickly. After our exposure of Derek at the gala, 6 more women had contacted Pinnacle's newly established independent ethics hotline. Their stories followed the same pattern, inappropriate comments escalating to unwanted touching, Derek using his position to isolate victims, complaints that were mysteriously resolved in ways that benefited Derek and silenced the accusers. The company had settled with all victims for undisclosed amounts, but sources suggested the total was well into 8 figures. More importantly, Pinnacle had implemented sweeping reforms, a completely new HR leadership team, mandatory harassment training for all employees, and an external ombudsman to handle complaints against senior leadership. There's more, Sarah said, scrolling down. Derek's been charged criminally. The district attorney is pursuing multiple counts of abuse of power and obstruction of justice for accessing and suppressing those HR complaints. Apparently, that crosses from civil to criminal territory. Good, I said simply. Michael. Sarah sat down across from me. I've been thinking about what you did. What we did. It was extreme. Are you having regrets? No. She said it firmly. But I keep wondering, what if you'd been wrong? What if the evidence hadn't been there? I wouldn't have acted if I wasn't certain. I spent an hour in that business center verifying everything before I made a move. But I understand what you're asking. Did the ends justify the means? Sarah nodded slowly. I considered my words carefully. In a perfect world, the system would have worked. Those 3 women who filed complaints should have been heard. HR should have investigated properly. The board should have held Derek accountable. But that's not what happened. Instead, a predator was protected because he was profitable. So we became vigilantes. We became advocates. There's a difference. I didn't fabricate evidence or make false accusations. I didn't even technically hack anything. I documented security negligence and made it impossible to ignore. Everything I showed on those screens was real, verifiable, and already existed. I just forced people to look at what they'd been avoiding. My phone rang. Margaret Fisk's name appeared on the screen. I put it on speaker. Mr. Whitmore, Ms. Whitmore. I hope I'm not calling at a bad time. Not at all, Margaret. What can we do for you? I wanted to update you both. Derek Hoffman has been formally terminated, and we've submitted documentation to the SEC regarding his conduct. He'll be barred from serving as an officer or director of any publicly traded company. That's good to hear, Sarah said. There's something else. The investigation your firm conducted revealed some additional concerning patterns. It appears Derek wasn't the only senior leader engaging in problematic behavior. 2 other executives have been placed on administrative leave pending further investigation. I leaned forward. Margaret, I need to ask, how did it get this bad? You're a competent board chair. Castellano seems like he genuinely cares about ethics. How did Derek and others operate so openly? There was a long pause. It's easy to not see what you're not looking for, Mr. Whitmore. Derek brought in huge accounts. His team had the lowest turnover, or so we thought. We didn't realize it was low because he'd systematically pushed out anyone who challenged him. We saw a successful executive and never looked deeper. Until you couldn't avoid it anymore. Precisely. Which brings me to why I'm calling. The board would like to establish a permanent position, Director of Corporate Ethics and Security. The role would have direct reporting authority to me and full autonomy to investigate any concerns about company culture or leadership conduct. We'd like to offer it to you, Mr. Whitmore. I blinked in surprise. Sarah's eyes went wide. I appreciate the offer, Margaret, but I have my own firm, which would continue operating. This would be a part-time consultancy role, 20 hours a month, with a substantial retainer. Think of it as insurance, for us and for our employees. Someone outside the usual corporate structure who can't be influenced or intimidated. Sarah and I looked at each other. She gave a small nod. I'll need complete autonomy, I said. No reporting requirements that could compromise investigations. Direct access to all systems and records. And whistleblower protection for anyone who comes to me with concerns. Done. I'll have our legal team draft the agreement. After we hung up, Sarah laughed, a sound of pure relief and exhaustion. We did it. We actually did it. You did it, I corrected. You were brave enough to tell me what happened. You were strong enough to stand up in that room. I just provided the technical expertise. You destroyed a predator's career and forced an entire company to confront its failures. That's a little more than technical expertise. That night, we ordered takeout and sat on our back patio, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and purple. Sarah was quiet, processing everything that had happened since that night at the gala. Do you think Derek will ever work again? She asked. Not in any position of power. The criminal charges will ensure that. But honestly, I don't care what happens to Derek. I care about the women he can't hurt anymore. The ones who work at Pinnacle now and won't have to worry about him. The ones at other companies who won't encounter him because his reputation precedes him. 7 women, Sarah murmured. 7 that we know of. How many others stayed silent? We'll never know. But because of what happened, because those women were brave enough to come forward after seeing the evidence, maybe others will feel safe enough to speak up when they face similar situations. My phone buzzed with an email. Rebecca Chen had sent a message to both Sarah and me. I started a new job today at a competitor firm. Better position, better pay. During my interview, when they asked why I left Pinnacle, I told them the truth. I told them about Derek, about the harassment, about being forced out. And instead of holding it against me, they said they'd been watching the news and were impressed by my courage. They wanted someone on their team who stood up for what was right. Thank you both for making it possible for me to be honest about what happened. Thank you for showing me that silence doesn't protect victims, it protects predators. Sarah read the email over my shoulder, and I felt her shoulders relax for the first time in weeks. That, I said quietly, is why we did it. No regrets, she asked. I thought about Derek, about the dramatic way I'd exposed him, about the calculated destruction of his career. I thought about the methods I'd used, technically legal but definitely aggressive. I thought about the chaos we'd caused at that gala, the scandal that had rocked an entire company. No regrets, I confirmed. I'd do it again in a heartbeat. Sarah kissed my cheek. My avenging angel. Your husband, I corrected, who happens to be very good with computers. 3 months later, Pinnacle Financial made headlines again, but this time for being named one of the top companies for workplace safety and employee protection. Their reformed policies became an industry model. Other companies started reaching out to me, wanting similar oversight positions. Some wanted to prevent becoming the next scandal. Others were trying to fix cultures that had already gone toxic. Derek Hoffman's trial was scheduled for the following spring. The DA's office was confident about conviction, the evidence was overwhelming, and several victims had agreed to testify. Derek had tried reaching out to Sarah once, through a lawyer, suggesting we'd fabricated evidence. His lawyer dropped him as a client 3 days later when our documentation proved ironclad. Late one evening, I was closing my laptop when Sarah appeared with 2 glasses of wine. "Penny for your thoughts?" she asked, handing me a glass. Just thinking about that night. How one moment changed everything. Do you think we changed things? Really? Or did we just take down one bad guy while the system stays broken? I considered that. Both. Maybe. We definitely took down Derek. But we also proved something important, that these things can't stay hidden if someone is determined enough to expose them. Before that night, everyone at Pinnacle knew there were rumors about Derek. But rumors are easy to ignore. Evidence displayed publicly at a company gala witnessed by hundreds of people? That's impossible to ignore. You made it impossible for them to look away. We made it impossible, I corrected. You were the one who stood up. You were the one who gave other women the courage to speak. I just provided the pyrotechnics. Sarah laughed. Quite the pyrotechnics. We sat in comfortable silence, sipping our wine. Somewhere across the city, Derek Hoffman was probably sitting in his attorney's office, preparing for trial, watching his life unravel. I didn't feel sorry for him. I felt satisfied. Justice isn't always neat. It isn't always delivered through proper channels with perfect protocol. Sometimes justice requires someone willing to kick down doors that should have been opened years ago. Sometimes it requires dramatic exposure of truths that powerful people have spent years hiding. And sometimes, just sometimes, justice requires a husband who refuses to let anyone hurt his wife and get away with it. To justice, Sarah said, raising her glass. To accountability, I replied, clinking my glass against hers. The sun set over the city, painting the sky in brilliant reds and golds. Somewhere, women were working in offices, secure in the knowledge that predators faced consequences. Somewhere, men like Derek were learning that power didn't equal immunity. Somewhere, the system was slowly, too slowly, but measurably, getting better. And in our home, Sarah and I sat together, knowing we'd played our part in that change. No regrets.